Good morning, everybody. Now you're probably tuning into this video because what you want to see is some cool brand new character build or neat idea to follow. And let me tell you, I want to give that to you. But you know what? Sometimes making unique character builds gets tiring. It's hard, okay? I gotta think about characters and classes and items and abilities. And I just didn't want to do it this time, so I decided to leave it up to the video game to do it for me. Instead of making a custom character build, there's actually a feature in the game where you can let the game build a character for you, called character paths. Now you're never supposed to take a character path because unfortunately, they're really bad. The skills are all over the place, the feats are all over the place, and heaven forbid you pick a character class that gets to pick their spells at their levels, because holy moly do you get bad spells. Now what I would love to do is to see Standing Stone Games take the time to update a lot of these older character paths to make them more viable for the current game. Which isn't to say that they should take all these old character paths and turn them into high-powered meta builds, but instead just make sure they actually make good choices during the leveling path, as opposed to things that are obvious traps or bad abilities. Now you might say, Strimtom, how do you know that they're bad abilities? Maybe some of these builds are good, or they ease people in. Well, don't worry about that, because today I have for you the Scourge of the Undead Cleric. Scourge of the Undead is one of the 3 different paths that you're able to choose, and I chose Scourge of the Undead because it sounded the coolest out of all of the character paths that I went over. Now before I made this character, to ensure that I was making as few decisions as possible, I decided to use a random number generator to generate my race, and of course it picked Warforged, which is one of the worst races you can pick for Cleric in the entire game. And of course this was done on hardcore because I figured, hey, if I'm going to be playing something that I know is going to be bad, and I'm playing as a Warforged, let's just do it on hardcore and see how well it goes. Now when I say bad, I mean bad. First of all, because I played as a Warforged, it immediately wanted to take Adamantine Plating. Now Adamantine Plating is very good, but the Scourge of the Undead is a Spellcaster Cleric. As a Spellcaster, you're generally not going to take a lot of damage in the early game anyway from being able to keep monsters at bay with your magic, and it's much more beneficial to have meta magic feats or things that empower your actual damage. However, I was able to persevere, and as I continued to level up, I got a whole bunch of spellcasting and meta magic feats. The unfortunate reality is I only got one feat that I actually wanted this entire time. Upon taking level 3, I got blindsided by Extend Spell. Now, is Extend Spell bad? Well, back in the day, it wasn't as bad. It was really good to have the ability to extend out your buffs because shrines felt a little bit tighter and you're always using all of your resources between each shrine. Additionally, when the game first released, buff spells only lasted 1 minute per character level, not the minimum of 5 minutes that most buffs seem to last now. Meaning that if you're a level 3 cleric, having a 3-minute bless is just not enough, and 6 minutes really helps out. However, in modern Dungeons & Dragons, it is completely unnecessary. Now sure, Extend Spell isn't necessarily a bad feat. It's very useful for certain spells, like Prayer, and there's gotta be another cleric spell in there. Divine Power? And that's pretty much it. As a result, it fell by the wayside, and I continued to pick up awesome metamagic feats, like Heightened Spell. Now Heightened Spell is not a bad thing. It's actually pretty good because it increases the DCs of your spells by making them count as a higher level spell. This gives me more damage, so of course, why wouldn't I want this? Well, I took it early, so all of my spells that I were casting were already the highest level spell, so it wasn't really any help. And to top it off, the game said, hey, you know what? You're a spellcaster. It even describes in the description that it's all about smiting and purging the undead. So it gave me spell penetration. That's right. Spell penetration and greater spell penetration for all those pesky spell resistance having undead. Well, I'm sure there's a few out there. So you might think, well, now you're just going to showcase a failure. Actually, this character worked surprisingly well. In fact, I kind of just devastated the game, because as it turns out, even with a minus to your wisdom and having no good feats, Cleric is insane. Cleric spells and the Divine Disciple tree with all of its spell-like abilities are just strong enough that you're pretty much always able to sustain your spell point cost while also decimating enemies with area of effect attacks. Holy Smite, Flame Strike, Firestorm, Comet Fall. These attacks work wonders. Now, of course, I mentioned before that some of my favorite domains for Cleric are Death Domain for all the extra undead damage, negative damage to people, your ability to turn undead is increasing, and amazing spell-like abilities. Sun Domain, because it gives you amazing spell-like abilities, light and fire damage. Fire Domain for amazing spell-like abilities and tons of fire damage, or even Luck Domain for all that defense in the form of displacement, which would be great to have with Extend. Or Law Domain to get access to Order's Wrath so you can lock down tons of chaotic targets, and later on, chaotic demons are kinda everywhere. I mean, gosh, there's so many good domains. And speaking of good domain, this character took the good domain. Now, the good domain is not necessarily good. I wouldn't say it's a bad domain, but it's definitely not in the top 5. You get Deific Vengeance as a spell-like ability at level 5, and then Blade Barrier as a spell-like ability at level 9. Additionally, in a feature that I definitely underrated before I used it, is that every single time you turn undead in any capacity, either from using your positive energy burst or the turn undead ability, you gain 5 temporary hit points for you and all of your allies per cleric level, coming out to 100 by the time you hit level 20. I thought this ability wasn't going to be very good, but I was using it surprisingly often in Hardcore League. It's effectively, you press a turn undead around level 6 or 7, and giving everybody 30 to 35 temporary hit points at a massive range is actually extremely good for keeping people alive in Hardcore. Deific Vengeance was a better spell-like ability than I originally gave it credit, although it is not as good as the Searing Light spell-like ability, which promptly replaced it from the Divine Disciple tree. And the Blade Barrier spell-like ability was surprisingly good because you get it at level 9. However, by the time you get to level 14, 15, 16, I kind of stopped using it entirely, and once you get to Sharn, it is a waste of time to even press. In Epics, you don't use any of your domain spell-like abilities, and your domain loses nearly 100% of its value. So while the good domain did have some cool features for leveling, there are generally better things. But because I was forced to play the good domain, I could at least learn a little bit about it and how it has some value and utility in Hardcore and for keeping you and your allies alive. Especially considering that you can use Positive Energy Burst, and the Positive Energy Burst not only heals you and your allies, but also applies temporary hit points on top of that, which is pretty cool. So overall, my experience was that Cleric is just so strong, it didn't matter that I had a bad character path, or that I was playing as a Warforged, I was just able to kind of rip my way through it anyway. Now, this is not a recommendation to go out and start playing the character paths. If you want to play a Cleric that is very, very, very strong, I would highly recommend it. Check out my Hardcore Build Guides Season 5. I made a Sun Cleric for that. It's a dwarf. It does a crazy high amount of damage, and it is significantly better than this hunk of garbage that I played and managed to get all the way to level 20 very, very easily on Hardcore League. And now I'm going to pass it over to me with the build. It turns out, Cleric is so good that you don't even need to have good abilities, and your character is going to be just fine. This is Strim of Exile, who lost their title, Scourge of the Undead, that I had for the majority of the leveling path, because I was on the Scourge of the Undead path. I'm not going to go into too much detail about how the character was built. Instead, I just want to focus briefly on what made the character so strong, and that's this tab right here. You see, when you play as a character, any type of spellcaster, you get these magical spells that allow you to do more damage. They do healing, they do protection, all sorts of weird, wacky abilities. Now, to go with your spells, you also get feats that enhance your abilities. Now, clerics get a domain, and I use the good domain because that's what the game gave me. It's not great. It's not that bad. Having Blade Barrier at level 9 is pretty cool, and the Deific Vengeance spell is pretty good. However, by about level 15, both of these spells are complete garbage, so that's kind of unfortunate. But for the early levels, not too shabby. Additionally, metamagic feats. Maximize, very good. Heighten, questionably good. It's sometimes good, but it's definitely not great at level 9, and Extend spell is pretty much always bad on a cleric. So I was very sad that I didn't have Quicken, which made it a little bit harder to level. And then spellcasting feats, generally spell penetration and greater spell penetration are only for the couple crowd control spells that you get, and also the instant kill spells like Destruction. However, you often aren't going to run into those situations where you can use these abilities because you have no spell DCs, because this path doesn't give you like enchantment focus or anything. So very cool. However, the character was still able to make it all the way to level 20 with pretty much relative ease, even as a Warforged, which I rolled randomly. So if you're like, oh wait, but what's the secret? Is there mind games of the Warforged? No, I rolled it randomly, which race I was going to play, and I just happened to get Warforged. The answer is Holy Smite is way too good. Searing Light is way too good. Where are you? I actually don't have Flame Strike, but Flame Strike and Flame Strike the spell-like ability, way too good. Sunbeam, way too good. Comet Fall, way too good. Firestorm, way too good. And Celestial Bombardment, way too good. Basically, all of these spells are way too good. And by that I mean they're so strong, they pretty much carry you even if your character sucks, your gear sucks, your item sucks. So if you're ever want to look for something to play that requires almost no effort and no thinking about, go with Cleric. You can't really go wrong. Even better, the Divine Disciple tree gives you Searing Light spell-like ability. Remember how I said Searing Light was good? Yeah, it's right here, spell-like ability. Holy Smite. Oh, I said that was good, and you get a spell-like ability. Flame Strike. That's good, and you get a spell-like ability. So fantastic. And then you get Sunbeam at level 12, which is just very good. Because I'm a Warforged, I got some extra defense here. And because I'm a Radiant Servant, I got Positive Energy Burst. I would recommend taking Quicken, but obviously, again, this is a... I did a pre-built character path, so there's only so much I can really talk about here, because I'd love to describe to you what my character did, but it's a really bad pre-built path. If you'd like to follow a character that is exactly like this and able to completely demolish the game, but do it faster and have more hit points and just have more defenses and just be better in general, I'm going to put a link in the description to Hardcore 5 build guides, so that way you can follow the Sun Domain Dwarven Cleric, which is exactly like this, but with more health. You can heal yourself properly because you're not a Warforged. You have actual good meta magic feats as opposed to Heighten at level 9. Ugh. And an actual good domain. So hopefully that will be helpful. Anyways, that's all I have for you today regarding the what happens when you pick a path. It was an interesting ride, interesting drive, and I died. And if you are curious as to how I died, check it out right now. The biggest sad times too. Here we go.
You find yourself inside the base held by the rebel bandits. The Prince of Frost wants you to retrieve a wine chalice that they stole.
But hit all of them entirely?
One of the Prince of Frost's favorite venues. He demands that you remove the griffins that seem to
And that's the end of the live stream. Thank you all for watching. We had a fantastic time. Appreciate the support. You know, you guys are great. Oh, I didn't expect to take that much damage.